Minister, the Harding-Clark report into the Symphysiotomy Redress Scheme has been described as deeply skewed, profoundly unfair, subjective and selective, intellectually dishonest, morally bankrupt, replete with false allegations, omissions, distortions, misrepresentations and contradictions, and biased throughout. And I think those who said that are actually being soft on Judge Harding-Clark, whose report cannot go unchallenged or uncorrected. She goes way beyond the terms of reference of her assessor report to the Minister, when all she was supposed to do was deal with the activities and expenditure of the scheme, and instead deviated into personal and unsubstantiated commentary, which is highly inappropriate in the context of outstanding litigation, riddled with false allegations, with items such as alleging that leading campaigners against symphysiotomy had alleged they had the procedure when they hadn't, completely and utterly untrue. And the only interpretation you can draw from this report is that it is a defence of the uniquely Irish practice of non-emergency symphysiotomy. It serves to diminish survivors' claims and is, in my opinion, a further violation of those women's human rights. Let's be clear. Symphysiotomy as practised in Ireland is a human rights abuse, and that is the case regardless of this report. There can be no denying that the state has been culpable in this, but rather than addressing these matters honestly, the report has served to diminish the suffering caused and undermine the experiences of the women. There is a continued suggestion that the women were lying. Nobody who met these women could ever believe that. And of course, Judge Harding-Clark met hardly any of them. It was a paper review with no right to appeal any of her decisions. So it's her opinion and her opinion only. It is hugely traumatic for the women involved that this horrific report has been published. I think the Minister needs to intervene, to have it withdrawn. It's hostile in its tone, it smears survivors and discredits them, rather than dealing with what was a bad policy and a deliberate policy and a poorly administered scheme. It needs to be withdrawn, and we need clarification on this.
Women were examined by relevant medical experts. Judge Clark encouraged women who believed they had a symphysiotomy to apply to the scheme, advising them that they did not give up their right to pursue their case to the courts by doing so. It was only on accepting an award under the scheme that a woman had to discontinue her legal proceedings. The vast majority of women opted to do so. The scheme was established following 2 independent reports which were commissioned by the Department of Health and following consultation with all 3 support groups by the then Minister for Health. 2 of the support groups welcomed the scheme and 1 support group did not. The first of these reports was commissioned in 2011, where the Department commissioned Professor Una Walsh to undertake independent research into the practice of symphysiotomy. Professor Walsh's research was included in a public consultation. The report recommended that an ex gratia scheme be established. In 2013, retired Judge Yvonne Murphy was commissioned by Government to undertake a further independent review on the legal aspect of symphysiotomy in Ireland. Judge Murphy advised Government on the merits and costs of proceeding with an ex gratia scheme relative to taking no action and allowing the court process to proceed. Symphysiotomy was an exceptional and rare intervention in obstetric practice in Ireland. It occurred in less than 0.05% of deliveries between 1940 and 1985. It is estimated that around 1,500 symphysiotomy procedures were undertaken in Irish hospitals and that there were around 450 women living who underwent the procedure. In most of the world, especially in Europe, the symphysiotomy procedure has been replaced mainly with the caesarean section procedure by the 1950s. Currently, the procedure is rarely performed in developed countries, but is still performed in rural areas and resource-poor settings of developing countries, where caesarean sections are not available or obstetricians may not be available to deliver subsequent pregnancies. The brief given to Judge Clark in November 2014 was not an easy one. At that time, the advice to the Department of Health was that many women would face an uphill struggle in improving their claims in the courts, with an uncertain outcome, as each case would be adjudicated on its merits. In her substantial report, Judge Clark has provided a comprehensive overview of the historical and medical context of symphysiotomy. Judge Clark had a unique opportunity to do this, and her findings support the earlier findings of Professor Walsh. Payments under this scheme, together with the ongoing provision of medical services by the HSE, including medical cards, represents a comprehensive response to the issue by Government, which should help to bring the resolution to women, many of whom are now elderly, and also to their families.
Deputy Daly, 1 minute.
I have to say there's been a certain rewriting of history again. We know that the majority of survivors never accepted this redress scheme to begin with, but the Minister is dodging the key elephant in the room, that this report goes even one step further from that. It is riddled with factual inaccuracies, unverifiable anecdotes, and is severely damaging. It is well known that people who experience trauma and upset as victims of abuse if their stories aren't believed. And the report is done in a manner which disbelieves the testimony of the women involved and makes outrageous claims. We know that not one woman anywhere submitted that she had consented or was aware of that procedure. Yes, the judge tells us that she finds it very difficult to believe that that's the case. There's no evidence to support her view in that situation. And this is the same judge who, when awarding payments previously, told the women they were getting the money to redress their unhappy experience. This was deliberate butchery carried out on people for ideological reasons. And the last point, Chair, is that I think what the report shows is a deliberate undermining of the human rights campaigners and groups whose work had actually led to the setting up of this scheme to begin with, bad and all as it is. And I'd remind the Minister that it took a former Minister to go to court to get the Gearan report withdrawn. We know the McAleese report into the Magdalen laundries was hugely criticised and controversial. And the point that's been made here is that this document cannot stand. It in and of itself abuses the women involved. It has to be withdrawn and considered further by this House.
Thank you very much, Deputy.